Greetings Internet, it's Alex and Davey from Barefaced, and we have 3 tiny cabs here. They're the smallest guitar cab we make, the Upsetter. In this case, as normal with an Upsetter, it's a 110. We can fit some of the 12-inch drivers in. I think only Neos. We haven't tried any non-Neo ones, have we?
No, I think the magnet depth's
there's just not enough space. But they've got some cool drivers in. This is G10 Vintage, which is our stock driver, which is a great sounding driver, which is quite like a Vintage 30.
Yeah.
Kind of a bit drier and tighter.
Yes.
A bit more mids, bit less bite up top, bit less fat. Detailed. This is a really weird rare driver, which is an EVM-10M, which I think is out of production.
Yes.
And this is a BN10-200X, which is technically a bass driver from Celestion, but works well for darker guitar sounds, I think we could say. We haven't tried EQing it to compensate, because the highs do go there. It just doesn't have the breakup peak. Most guitar drivers have quite a pronounced breakup peak between 2 and 5 kilohertz, and the BN10 is very controlled there, so you don't get this sort of spike of extra highs. So the highs are there, they just don't pop out, because it's quite a big peak often. It can be like 5 dB, 10 dB high, and very pronounced on axis, which is why we tend to mic slightly off axis. I've got a dB meter. Davey's got
Reverend Roundhouse. GA, did you say it was?
RA, I think.
Sorry.
It's basically the fixed bridge or stop tone, whatever you call it.
Yeah, it's great. It's our new Les Paul.
Yeah.
And I've been really enjoying getting to know it.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful
volume,
guitar.
tone, bass roll off. So it's the sort of Reverend signature controls.
Yeah. And to pair with our tiniest cabs, we have the tiniest amp that I've ever seen, other than one that maybe goes on your pedal board. But this has a singular valve.
Yes.
It's running off what looks like a 9-volt. It's a 15-volt, basically a laptop charger.
Part of the reason it's so small is a third of the amp is missing. So there's a preamp, there's a power amp, but there's no power supply in there, and the power supply is external.
But despite that, it goes very loud. It's pretty gnarly. I mean, we had stuff...
It's got one transistor on, one quite big transistor on a fairly chunky heatsink, and that's it.
Yeah. But just imagining this tiny little amp that can probably fit in a, probably in the front of your gig bag, and something as light as an Upsetter, it's a pretty ferocious...
Actually, I think it'll fit in the back of the AVD.
That's true,
tuck it in the back of the AVD, because they all have this thing in the back that does magic acoustic stuff. Helmholtz resonator at low frequencies, and then a sort of diffractor horn thing at mid and high frequencies to filter in with sound. So you basically get the sound off the front and the back of the driver coherently. But yeah, I think that would tuck in there, and then you can stick the cover over the top.
We'll test that in a minute, but I think we'll get some sounds through first. Have you mentioned the microphone?
There's a microphone.
Room mic.
It's about 4 foot away, about 4 foot something, 1.3 metres, something like that. Yeah, slightly wider than the sheet of plywood if you were a carpenter.
Yeah.
We've got a dB meter. That's a large diaphragm condenser, which we feel is the most honest way of representing things in the room. The voices are going through the road on the camera, and we squish them so the levels are reasonable for you to watch without having to turn things up and down constantly. But in terms of what's happening through the large diaphragm condenser, there's no messing. It just is. It's an honest representation. We're not trying to polish things. We're not trying to make anything sound perfect. We're just comparing gear, talking about gear. And at lower frequencies, the ones that are not terribly relevant for guitar, you're going to have the mic and the room affecting things a lot. So if this is a bass video, which it isn't, listen to what we're saying about what's happening into the room, as opposed to trying to hear it, because you won't, because whatever you're listening through, and the microphone, and this room's all going to make more difference to the real low frequencies than what's actually coming out of the cab.
Yeah. Cool. We've got it flat, but flat means the gain's actually quite gnarly on this little thing. I've dipped the volume a little bit. Actually, I might just bring it back up again, because it does get quite loud. Actually, you know what? No, let's just have it at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Let's get loud.
And there's a shape knob that sounds best in the middle, but it's a mid scoop to the right and a mid boost to the left.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to understand.
Yeah. For recent calls on YouTube in the comments about using an amp's natural distortion rather than relying on fuzz and distortion through pedals to get some of that truer. We're going with that. So even though I've got my board, even though I've got my board plugged in, I'm just using a tiny bit of reverb. And then as the video progresses, I might add a little bit more distortion.
I'm going to stick the dB meter down here, a meter away from the cabs.
Cool. Here we go.
The more I hear that BN10, the more I like it.
Yes, it's weird. I think I was testing the speakers. It just had. It felt like it had. Compared to these two, it felt like it didn't have as much body, but
it's really tight.
It's really tight.
Controlled.
And actually, in terms of mix with the rest of the band, something like the EVM would be amazing if you were the only guitarist in a really guitar-driven band.
Very loud.
Very, very loud. But I feel like if you were in a larger ensemble with maybe another guitarist, that would be perfect, because you would still slot perfectly into the mix. You'd have everything that you need when you offer, well, everything you're offering the band in that moment in terms of your guitar.
Just so you guys know how loud we're playing in here. Is that in focus? Yes, I think. 116.9 decibels.
Whoa.
At 1 meter. It's quite loud.
That's pretty loud, yeah. Again, I think that EVM is really...
Yeah, so the EVM's rated at 99 dB sensitivity. I mean, obviously that's one number to approximate the curves, the many curves that describe a speaker. The G10 Vintage 97 dB and the BN10 96 dB. And in terms of power handling, 60 watts.
Yep.
300 watts from the EVM and 200 watts from the BN10. Obviously, the EVM you're going to have to hunt on eBay to find one, or Reverb or wherever, because they are gone. But fun thing about this, God, it is comical. It's so light, because that's a Neo driver. That's quite light. That is a lot heavier. So that's all of that's magnet weight. So it's the huge ferrite magnet in that that's giving it the extra loudness, that mid-range push.
Yeah.
I don't think that the EVM goes as high as the BN10. I just think it's got a bit more spank and bite and a lot more mids.
Yeah.
I think the BN10 goes higher, but it doesn't have the push.
Yeah. It's weird. So maybe putting a bit of distortion through the BN10 might help with that. But then I feel like, I think I've had this before, even though I'm putting like a distortion or an overdrive through it, it does just sound like a fuzz when it goes through the EVM.
The G10 Vintage sounds more like a typical guitar cab.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very much just ticks box of this is rock guitar sound.
Yeah. Should we stick with this? Should we try baritone, seeing as we've got the bass driver? Should we do that now?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. I might turn the gain down a little bit now, just because...
That's got hotter pickups, I think.
Yeah. So still on the bridge pickup as we were with the Roundhouse, the Les Paul.
These are railhammer pickups. I mean, I think all the Reverend pickups are railhammers, but this is what the railhammer's named after, this concept of having this blade pickup, so narrower aperture on the wound strings, and then the large fat pole pieces, so you've got a wider aperture on the high strings, and basically it tightens up the low strings and fattens up the high strings. It makes so much sense. It sounds really good.
Yeah. I'm really enjoying this guitar at the moment.
exactly the same as we did with the other guitar.
Yeah, weird. I
Yeah.
thought we'd get more. I thought we'd get more from this, but maybe, like you said before, maybe we need to EQ a little
I
bit.
think the BN10 likes to be EQ'd for itself, and also it's less sensitive, so there is definitely an issue, and you guys will be hearing it too, because we're not going to be normalising between the different cabs and we're not compressing.
Yeah.
The louder cab will always sound better. Even though it doesn't sound better, it just sounds louder.
Yeah.
This is the laws of tone and music. Louder things sound better, but to make something with lower sensitivity sound louder, you just turn the volume knob up a bit.
Absolutely.
You know, unless you're running out of amp power, but amp power's cheap, and
True.
you know.
Well, as great as this little thing is, should we switch over to this so we can EQ
Yes.
it a bit, and then maybe swap out a driver?
Yeah.
And then
See what else we find.
Great.
Cool. Back in a sec. Right, we're back. We've now got the tweaker, which is 15 watts of valves,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. We've got it all set to 12 o'clock, but we've kind of got it on the hot setting, so it's a little bit
cool
more...
amps, these, now discontinued, but it basically you can switch a bunch of switches and it sort of revoices it from Marshall to Fender to Vox.
Yeah.
So it's not changing the valve type, but other than that, it's changing the EQ curves and the way it drives things.
So we've got it on the hot settings. That's just where it's just got a bit of overdrive, and we've actually got it on the USA, which is the Fender setting.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably the closest to the orange. Maybe the orange is a little bit more of a Marshall, but I think in terms of tone, it sounded very
That tends to be
similar.
where the dip is in the mid. That seems to be the key difference between
What happened
the.
to your hair?
It's very tiring here. It's just things fall out.
Yeah, in between swapping over the amps, all that hair's fallen out. Running a business.
Yes. Right.
Right, so yeah, we'll just get straight into it. Yeah, it's quite a dirty tone still. Just the amp. So I haven't put any distortion or gain staging on my board. There's a bit of delay on, there's a bit of reverb on still. Yeah, cool, here we go. Yeah.
I'm hearing them differently with that amp.
Yes, there's two valves. Hence,
Yeah, but the
one.
big difference between the two amps, really,
Yeah.
is that one's got a solid state output stage, and the other one's got a valve output stage and an
Yes.
output transformer. So
Yeah.
very different in what's actually happening in the interaction between the amp and the cab.
For sure.
I mean, how loud are we playing there? It's about the same as before, so 116.7 decibels.
Yeah. Again, I feel like the same thing was happening, even though we've switched to an amp that has a little bit more beef. Yeah.
The BN10 is very tight.
Yeah.
Tight and tidy, not bitey, kind of smooth on the top. I felt there was more distortion when we went to the EV.
Yeah.
It sounded loads more distorted.
Yeah. I mean, hearing it back through the microphone, I might have a different opinion, but I was just really hoping with the baritone, more of the baritone would come out.
It's a very small cab, and it's only a 10. I think
True.
it probably wants a bigger enclosure.
Yeah.
Be interested to hear that in a reformer, because we can put the 10-inch drivers in the bigger cabs, and we can do it with an adapter ring, which allows you to then have a 12 or a 10 in there. You just take the adapter ring out.
Yes, we can. Great. Okay.
But also, I do think there's that element of you just EQ it to get those bigger lows, and because it can take the power in terms of, you know, both thermally and an excursion, so you can get more low end. What's if you push a G10 vintage that hard, the drive's just going to run out of movement.
Yeah. Should we swap out?
Should we try
With the same setup?
Try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the amp as it is.
Yeah.
So I've switched it down to the clean, but there's still a bit of break up there. I've got the machinist on my board. I'm using that as the main distortion. I'll only be using the right channel, which is similar to an OCD circuit.
Is it?
I believe so. I think we were looking into this
Yeah.
and we're saying it's probably the closest thing to the OCD. And the middle is Big Muff circuit.
Yeah,
similar.
it's Big Muff with a mid boost added.
Yes.
Yeah, adjustable mid boost.
I do also have a harmonic percolator, which I really like for big, gnarly sound. And it's more of a fuzz, but it's also, I was discussing this the other day, it's not a fuzz, it's a
Percolator.
It's a percolator, yes. It boosts the good frequency.
Oh, it's claiming to do even order rather than odd order harmonic distortion.
Yes.
Don't know if it does.
So
There's a lot of claims about that, and
might
also about how that affects tone, and it's all a bit kind of mysticism and woolly and possibly snake oil.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
What are we in at the moment? Are we in the...
We are in the
BM10. So that's it as is. Then we've got the right channel, the overdrive. And then this is what the harmonic percolator sounds like. So
That's a fuzz.
Yeah,
That's
that's more of
definitely
a
a
fuzz.
fuzz.
Yeah, and this is the machinist fuzz. I've scooped more of the mids, but that's also got the parallel channel on, so you get a little bit of the drive signal, which is really handy when you really want to beef up something. Because if you imagine, like, if I turn that off, and then have to very fuzzy. But then if you were to have it with the parallel, hear more of the guitar underneath.
Yeah.
So I'll switch between that.
What I'm noticing with the G10 Vintage versus the BN10 is the G10 Vintage is kind of blurrier and warmer and bigger and fatter and kind of the more, but the BN10 is very tight and very detailed.
Yeah.
Kind of like a quieter, less aggro copperback.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And the thing about the copperback is you never have that moment of going, oh, it's quieter, because it's not quiet. It's a really loud driver.
Yeah.
But it makes me think, what does a BN10 sound like, you know, as an alternative?
Yeah. And we were talking about pedal steel drivers because we've got a pedal steel player and builder in our midst. And we've wanting to do a video and we were discussing drivers and maybe that would be a really good one to try.
I think so.
Yeah.
It seems that pedal steel, if you're a pedal steel or lap steel player or slide players tend to do different things actually to pedal and lap steel, don't they? I guess they're not playing as many notes at once. They're not playing a thing that's deliberately in open tuning and But there seems to be a tendency towards almost bass speakers.
Yeah.
It looks like the specific pedal steel and lap steel designed drivers are tweaked versions of bass speakers. Which that is an untweaked bass speaker, but it's a bass speaker that works well for guitar. So it seems logical.
Should we swap out a driver?
Yes.
Cool. G10 Gold. Alnico.
Very nice speaker. Not cheap. Works really well for jazz, we found. This is not jazz.
I could do some jazz.
I was going to say we don't have a jazz guitar, but you can play jazz with any guitar.
Yeah. Exactly.
That man who wrote that really, really, really difficult book plays a Telecaster. I've forgotten his name. You know the Jazz Chords book?
Oh.
The book that makes you think you'll never ever be able to play guitar because it's too difficult. Ted? Chord Chemistry.
Oh, chord chemistry. Yeah, I do know that.
Yeah.
I know of it.
He plays a Telecaster and he knows all the jazz chords.
There we go. Shouldn't be as rough with that at home. That's just because this is a demo one. And it gets taken off on and off all the time. Nice.
That. Oh, check that out. So, gold. Always believe in your tone. Don't slip. Don't slip.
Bish bash bush.
Do you know? I don't think that takes any longer to swap than a closed back normal build cab. You know, where the back's removable. Might even be quicker. You know, because they're normally rear-loaded, aren't they?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you consider that one, that you have to take the entire back off, and there's so many screws to hold it in.
Yeah,
it's definitely easy.
Well, there you
to take
go.
off.
The gold has replaced the BN10. Yeah.
Should we go hot again with the amp?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to just rely on the distortion of the amp rather than doing any of the gain on my board. Cool.
That G10 Gold is amazing.
It's amazing, yeah. Yeah, I could tell straight away. I just assumed...
It's the best of everything. It's just right. If you want a 10-inch cab, just get a G10 Gold in it.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That's so good. Yeah.
You know how because I really like the Alnico 12s.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly convinced by the Ruby. That's a bit dark and
Yeah, we
mid-rangey.
haven't really tried.
But the blue sounds incredible, but
classic Vox.
incredible, but handles very little power.
Yeah.
The gold is like a slightly mellowed out blue and handles a much more useful amount of power. And the cream is kind of, I would say, halfway between the blue and the gold tonally, but handles tons of power. It's like a 90-watt speaker.
Yeah.
You know, the G10 Gold is a 40-watt speaker compared to the 12-inch Gold, which is a 50-watt. But, just, much for muchness. The G10 Gold, though, I don't think it's... You know how the Alnico 12s have all got that kind of mellowed out top end? They've got clarity, but, they manage to be clear without ever being bright.
Yeah.
But that is bright. That G10 Gold has brightness and smoothness and detail and chunk and bottom, and that's incredible. Clearly, we haven't done a video about the G10 Gold before, or I have no memory whatsoever.
I feel like we haven't either. Or if it was ages ago, and it was probably up against like four other.
I spent
drivers.
some time in here with a really great jazz guitarist who was playing a really expensive, big body, hollow body Gibson with just a neck pickup and flat wounds and doing lovely jazz things. And trying lots of different drivers, including some he'd brought himself.
Mm-hmm.
And his conclusion was the G10 Gold was the best and was worth the extra weight over the Neo drivers he'd brought with him.
Yeah.
Because it sounded so good for jazz, but proper bebop and stuff, proper jazz guitar playing. But it's just rocks.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Should we just do one last thing with... I've switched to clean. Should we just try and see what it's like with some cleanish and some effects? And then
That's such a nice driver. Because the EVM has this really cool mid-push.
Mm.
But it didn't feel like we were losing any of that mid thing with the Gold.
No.
It just did it nicer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
And it was chunkier and fatter than the G10 Vintage.
Mm.
It had this thickness.
So where that has got a lot of roundness and body, very punchy, and this is just a bit louder and a bit more domineering and a bit like in your face. This is like perfect in between. Almost.
Yeah, I'm very sceptical about anything that's claimed to be a best of both worlds or a ultimate whatever, because everything's a balance of compromises, but sometimes something is just really well optimized. Yeah, I also think the G10 Gold is less Alnico sounding than all the 12-inch Alnicos. I just don't think it's got that mellowness on the top. I think there's got that the smaller quick. We've noticed it before in videos that the 10s sound drier and more mid-rangey than the 12s, and they have more air but less kind of bite. So the treble goes higher, but it doesn't bite in the same way on the 12s. But this seems to, because of that, it seems to have this brightness. That's just brilliant. Right.
Cool.
I'll stop talking. Hopefully it sounds good on the mic. No, that's the Evie.
It can really keep up with the EVM, can't it?
It really totally can. It's got. I'm hearing it's got a bit of a low mid thickness to it, so there's a bit of balancing, not ending up with boom.
Yeah.
On some of the bigger chords where you've got lower notes ringing in them.
Yeah.
But that's just a question of dialing things in. But that's what makes it chunk.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very detailed.
I was flitting between the pickups just to kind of get a feel for it. I'm not too familiar with this guitar in terms of tone, and obviously it's hard to kind of adjust as we go, but it felt like it could really hold up in nearly any neck position with a little bit of tweaking. It sounds great. I love it.
That is a killer speaker.
That's really good. Wow. Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah. I'm now very curious about all these drivers in larger cabs, so in the Reformer.
Yeah.
So 10s in a slightly bigger enclosure.
Yeah.
It's still not a big enclosure. And then there's also the options of our 212 cabs, where you could put a 10 in one of the spaces. So you can have a 12 and a 10 in the same cab.
Right. Because I know you said this before with bass drivers specifically. You generally would never recommend to mix a 10CR and a 12XN.
Yeah, with bass, you're always... I feel with bass, the core of what you're doing is... Oh, by the way, we got up to 118 decibels earlier. I feel with bass, you're always fighting for coherency and tightness and punch and immediacy. So you want everything to be as much kind of matching and aligned and together as possible.
Yeah.
That's why we add DIs to bass. Even if you've got a great sound out of your amp, they're bothering to mic your cab, they'll still take a DI usually.
Yeah.
Because it tightens things up.
Yeah.
What's with guitar, you're kind of doing the opposite a lot of the time. A guitar, I think the essence of it comes down to the fact that a guitar on its own, DI'd into the board, sounds pretty much awful. Whilst a bass sounds right.
Yeah.
So with a bass, you might want to add tone through amps and pedals and speakers and stuff like that, but you don't want to go too far into blurry, woolly mess.
Yeah.
And as soon as you mix drivers, you do end up with this sort of broader, more textured sound, but what you gain in kind of texture, you lose in definition.
Yeah.
What's with guitar, and I think that's why it works so well having two guitars in a band. But two basses in a band hardly ever works. It takes really careful arranging. But two guitars sounds great, and a lot of that is because of the texture, and it's also why we add reverb to guitar. That's also why when you're recording guitar, it's not uncommon to use multiple microphones.
Yeah.
So you're adding texture and mixing things up. What's with bass, there are bass sounds I know of on record where they have done multiple mics and things like that. The Metallica Load, I remember reading an interview about that when I just started playing bass, and that I think they got 3 entire rooms full of cabs, each with its own miking setup.
Yeah.
And what you get in exchange for that is quite a blurry, muddy tone.
Yeah.
I'm not really that convinced by it. Whilst mic and DI, or 2 DIs or 2 mics, time align it all, makes it right. But yeah, so some people do mix our drivers, our 10s and our 12s in bass world. But it's quite unpredictable. I wouldn't recommend it. You can try it, but it's, and it will end up blurrier.
Yeah, because you get a speaker that's more coloured, and then you get one that's more honest, and then when you try and mix those two, it's like
and they'll mix one way at one level, and as you crank up more, they'll change in different ways. Basically, our 12XM doesn't really change as it gets louder. The 10CR starts to get gnarlier in different ways. So then their phase behaviour is going to change. They're going to be non-linear in different ways.
Yeah.
What's with guitar, that's all just fun tone stuff. But it comes back to actually, and this is a bit contentious, I generally prefer one pickup on a bass or one pickup on at a time. Which, considering the jazz bass is probably the second most popular bass in history, is quite contentious. But I've just noticed that although there's loads of bassists I like who play jazz basses, some of my favourite bassists play jazz basses, And there's also bassists like Bootsy, who on his Star bass, I think, had 5 pickups, each going to different pedals and different rigs. For me, I really like the coherency and immediacy of just one pickup, because you don't get any phase difference. And I've noticed a lot of the time, I will play with my hand over the pickup for the most immediate, coherent, punchy sound.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'll move away from that and deliberately blur things up. But I don't really want that coming from cabs, because it's so hard to turn off cabs.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons I love tellies. I just generally find myself never moving away from that lipstick neck pickup.
Right.
And it's just simple. Whereas something like this, it's like, I might be on the bridge for a lot of the gnarlier stuff, but then it's when you go to the neck, you know, that's when suddenly you might think, oh, okay, I want to roll off a bit of that.
A lot of adjusting.
Yeah, a lot of adjusting. Whereas if you have a bridge pickup with nothing rolled off, these pickups are obviously great.
Yeah.
They can just pick up so much, but then if I go to the thing, a bit muddy, but then.
Yeah, recently for a few years, I've just been playing a Stingray. One pickup, I leave the EQ flat, put the volume at max.
Yeah.
And that's that, and my right hand does everything I want, or pedals. And then the other one I've got now, the Jack Cassidy, again, one pickup. Volume up, tone up, very tone thing to 50 ohms. Leave it alone.
Yeah.
Anyway. That ends the lesson.
There we go.
We'll be back. Buy a cab with a G10 Gold in it. Put a G10 Gold in the cab you already have.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're in the UK, we'll sell you one for a cab, but I think it gets quite complicated selling drivers independently, separately, internationally. But yes. But more on that later.
Yes.
Thank you. We've been Alex and Davey from Barefaced.
Oh, do you want to do the honours?
What? No, you can do it.
Bye.